So good morning, good afternoon. I'm David Solomon, and in addition to being the Director of Research and Creative Activity at Christopher Newport University in Virginia, I'm the current chair of the Undergraduate Research Programs Division of CUR. I want to welcome you to this month's Undergraduate Research Programs Exchange. These 50-minute Zoom sessions are monthly facilitated exchanges of ideas and information on a variety of topics and issues related to undergraduate research programs. Sessions are recorded and will be made available in the CUR community, the CUR URP website, and will be emailed to all who pre-registered for the call. These exchanges are not designed to be formal presentations, but instead begin with very brief introductions by facilitators, and then we'll open for discussion and questions. Today's session addresses working with development, advancement, and donors to raise funds for undergraduate research and creative activity. We're fortunate to have colleagues representing two institutions to facilitate this session. First, I'm going to ask the guests to introduce themselves and speak for a few minutes about their practices, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion. So let me get the first slide up here. Okay. Wait a minute. It helps if you click share first, doesn't it? There we go. Okay. All right, so I am my usual snarky self, and when we came up with this idea, I thought we really need to subtitle this "How to Run a Bake Sale" because, for those of us who've been doing that as parents and working with kids, we know how to do that already. So I'm going to turn it over here to Ann Betcher, my colleague at Embry-Riddle, to start us off.
So hello, everyone. I'm the Assistant Dean of Research at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and I run our undergraduate research program, and I ran one at another institution before this, so I can kind of speak from both sides. And I'm going to say that I stole this first slide, or a derivative thereof, from Mike Palladino, who is also a CUR member. When I first started thinking about where money could come from for funding undergraduate research, scholarship, and creative activities at my previous institution and have used it moving forward. So where I am now, our funding holistically for the whole university is tuition driven. So when we started to look at how we could find other funding sources, I did what Mike suggested, which was just break down where we have funding from currently, and then figure out where I want to move the needle. And so I will tell you at our current, where I am now at Embry-Riddle, I was told your budget is what your budget is. It's probably not going to increase. So find money somewhere else. So we do have some university level grants that help our programming. Of course, faculty individual grants and contracts help that needle. And so I decided, despite my lack of success where I was before at working with philanthropy, I would really try to work with them to move the needle forward, to move from this very small pie pieces to much bigger pie pieces. You can move the slide, David. So what we know, you can click forward. Oh, that's weird. Huh. I think something's missing, but that's okay. So what I discovered when I started to work with philanthropy was it isn't really just philanthropy. It's a whole cluster of different groups. It's philanthropy, marketing, alumni, and enrollment management. And unlike my previous institution, when I first got here, alumni and marketing came and said, hey, what can we do with you? And we kind of talked about things, and then we brought in some other groups. And finally, in working directly with our philanthropy programs, we figured out that undergraduate research programs have the stories, and all the other groups have the connections. And so that really became how we started to build our programming, was understanding that all of those offices, marketing, enrollment management, philanthropy, need stories. Because if they can't tell stories about humans, they're not going to make connections or get money. Because people do fund projects, but they really like to fund humans. And so this is where we began to work together and started to build a structure. And I'll move it forward since I can't remember what else was on that slide, Dave, and it somehow didn't
Sorry.
translate right. And so the first step was really to find the key student stories. And I've been at Embry-Riddle for 11 years. And so we've really developed that partnership strongly. And then figure out what stories align with what groups might be funding things. And so we have 3 principal areas that we work with philanthropy on. We have just begun this year working with community organizations and understanding what their needs are, building projects around those needs that align with our students and our faculty mentorship, and then partnering with those community organizations to develop funding lines. And so just as an example of that, in the one corner, I have Western Heritage Center. Western Heritage Center is a very small museum in Prescott that features all the different museums in the region, with a focus on the past history of the region, but also looking at moving forward. And their displays were very static, so they wanted much more interactive things in their museum. And so they're partnering with our Games and Sims program to develop some movies that people can participate in. And you see a shot of our students and the leads from the organization, both on their green screen backdrop and on one of the first films the students developed. The students developed mini scenarios, and so people can come in and act out and take their video home just using an iPad. The next project we're working on with them is a hologram. I think it's going to be Teddy Roosevelt. I am not sure. We're still in discussions. But for this group, what we did was they had a small amount of donor funding that gave funding to our students to develop the project. Then they held an event where they began to market this project, and we are working in collaboration with them to get donors. So that's sort of a new piece where we're working collectively with an external group for donors. And I think it actually has strong potential because we have 2 other groups that have started to express interest. But it really was finding the right mentors for the project and making sure there was alignment. This has been our big lesson learned with industry partners. In the bottom center, you can see Honeywell. That was one of our first industry partners. They don't necessarily, all of our industry partners don't necessarily provide direct funding, but they provide projects and expertise. And so the partnership we've built with Honeywell is a model we use for many of our industry partners moving forward. We had an alum who is passionate about Embry-Riddle and passionate about Honeywell, where he is an upper level individual. And so we were able to start small, and now we've grown that all of our campuses are participating. And one of the key lessons we learned was, when you're working with an industry partner, what are their needs, but also what their commitment can be in terms of not just finances, but their expertise. And so we've had some stumbles, but if you can figure out if a partner can have lots of mentorship of your students or little mentorship of your students, you can better align projects and figure out what type of funding in terms of dollars that you would want with them. The top two panels, the CubeSat and the protection of African wildlife, are two longer term projects. One of them was based on direct interest from an industry partner and an alum. So it really took work with alumni engagement and our philanthropy program to figure out the best pairing for this. The other, the CubeSat, was a story when the students first started the project that our marketing and our philanthropy started sharing for direct outreaches to some foundations, but also just to our general, for our general fund. And so the big lesson I had to learn was I can't ask for specific things. I have to find stories and needs and then partner with the other groups to figure out where there's alignment. But what that means is those projects get funded by those other groups so that we can make the internal dollars stretch further. And we've really been able to expand that because of the recognition of the success. We now have philanthropy councils in each of our colleges that directly fund student projects. Those students submit their ideas and the councils select from among those. So that gives us even more flexibility. And I will pass it
Great.
off to Ashley.
Yeah, so we're going to pass it off to Ashley Fricks Gleason, my colleague at Creighton University. And if you have questions, please drop them in the chat.
Hi, everyone. I'm the director of the Center for Undergraduate Research and Scholarship here at Creighton. And after I sent my slides to David, I realized that this should say someone who is learning to harness the power of philanthropy. This is definitely not past tense learned, but it has been both in my current position here at Creighton and in my previous role at a different institution, a big learning curve for me to feel like I even belong in the room with some of the folks that I end up in the room with to have some of these conversations. So I would just encourage you to embrace the learning. Next slide, please, David. So I'm going to use our summer undergraduate research and creative activity fellowship program as an exemplar. Some of the same breakdowns permeate throughout our program, but this is a nice model to use. So we're now just finished our 20th year of this program and have given out 517 fellowships over that 20 years. So it's got a nice data set for us to work with. And then you can switch to the next one, David. And what you can kind of tell here is that initially, for the first 5 years of the program, it was a single funding source. It was one donor who had a beautiful vision and started a program that now has grown into this much larger endeavor on campus that has multiple funding sources and is supporting far more students. But I think the story there is how, and this predates me, but how Creighton was able to transition from that initial limited scope donation to the SURF program that we have now. So if you could go next slide, David. So I put this on here because I wanted to give you a sense of the timeline. So again, it was started in 2006, and it was a donor who only wanted those funds to go towards STEM students. We have a high STEM population of students here. It was a good fit. But what it did was it started to create a little bit of competition and a little bit of I don't know, resentment's not the right word, but like, well, how come the STEM students have this opportunity? How come everyone else doesn't have this opportunity? And so then the College of Arts and Sciences dean throws in some money to be able to support students beyond STEM, and then the honors program, and then the Jesuit mission folks came in, and then history and Jewish studies, and you can sort of see it progressing across time. And it really has been, even in the 18 months that I've been here, a department will come up to me and say, well, how come history has a SURF award that's dedicated just for history? And I'm like, well, because history found money. And so history gets to say, we have one that can only go to a history student. And so then I'll be darned, here comes nursing and here comes comm and some of these, departments that we've been in conversation with over the last year. Oh, we have an alumni donor that gives us some money that's not restricted. Maybe we could use that alumni's donation to have a surf award that's earmarked for our students, right? And so it's been this really organic, kind of competition fueled, right, way of finding these little pots of money as we go. You can go to the next one, David. So to give you a sense of the overall breakdown in our SURF program, right now we're sitting at about 53% donor funds for the whole program in the summer. 47% is coming from internal dollars. And you can see that that then gives us a decent amount of funding restrictions, right? So we've got a good chunk of it that's designated. It has to go to STEM students. Now some departments have come in, business, history, nursing, communications, right? Those have to go to certain students, but we still have about 39% of those awards that really are open and can be handed out based on, fully merit, right? Which proposals score the highest regardless of discipline. And then you can click to the next. And so for me, what this has highlighted is needing to start to become comfortable in spaces that I am not naturally comfortable and needing to Anne's point, really harness those relationships with other areas on campus, enrollment management, alumni relations, and particularly university relations. And for me, this has been a little bit learning a new language, right? Learning to think and speak like a fundraiser is not at least for me, and my PhD is in neuroscience, right? Like this is not how I was trained as a faculty person. It's not even how I was trained as I started shifting towards more of a administrative position, right? It's an entirely different way of thinking. And so I want to highlight a couple lessons I've learned. So next slide, please. The first is that you do get stuck honoring donors' wishes, right? And finding ways to celebrate their contributions. And that is wonderful and challenging in the same sentence, right? If I'm being honest, right? As an example, the donor that supported our SURF program initially and has been one of our biggest benefactors for 20 years gets their own poster session every year, right? There's the end of summer poster session that's for all the students, and then the donor has a special event where their contributions are highlighted. That's fine. That's great. Two options for that student to get two presentation lines on their CV. That's wonderful, right? But what it was unintentionally doing was creating a little bit of a feeling of inequity because the donor's celebration was funded by university relations. And so there were appetizers and there were fancy balloon arches, or not what I don't even know what to call those, balloon atomy looking things hanging from the ceiling in the ballroom. And it just felt different than the summer program that our office was sponsoring, where there were like really nice cupcakes and, but it just had, it kind of felt like a different level. And so this year we upped our everybody presentation, right? We got the appetizers, we put it in the ballroom, we, made it feel more comparable. And the feedback from that blew my mind, right? And so just being mindful of, what I say to faculty often when they get a little sassy about like, well, how come that money is earmarked for X, Y, or Z? It's okay that that money is earmarked for X, Y, and Z, because then that lets me take dollars in our budget that aren't necessarily earmarked for that, and then, find those points of equity. But that only works if you're actually being intentional at looking for, places of inequity and trying to sort it out. Next slide. It also, like I said, I had to speak a totally different language, right? There was a foundation pitch very soon after I started here. I knew almost nothing about Creighton, and they were like, we're putting you in front of a room with folks from this foundation, and we think that there's the potential that they're going to give us lots of money. I mean, you can see dollar values we were talking about, right, on these slides here. And so suddenly, I send a slide deck to the foundation, folks on campus, and they're like, yeah, we got to work on your language. And so things like pressure points and investment opportunities and partnership impact. And that's just not a language I naturally spoke in as a faculty member. And so finding ways to Anne's point, you don't necessarily get to ask for what you need, but what stories can you tell that highlight a variety of needs that then hopefully one of those speaks to the folks that you're in front of in the room. And much like our life, as faculty writing grants or staff writing grants, you're going to submit more than you're going to win. And the same thing is true in this space. You know, they were 100%, and I shouldn't say 100, they were very confident. Like, we're going to put you in front of this foundation. It's going to end so wonderfully. We're so excited. This is like almost a shoe-in. And then the foundation decides to sunset, 45 days after we do the pitch. No one could have predicted that. It's just, it's what happens. And so you roll with the punches and you move on. My last slide is next. And the other thing I'm going to encourage you to do is to try to take advantage of what may even feel like the smaller lifts, right? So both at my previous institution and at Creighton, they have Giving Day campaigns where they, hit everybody up for, any sort of small amount of money. And at my previous institution, that was kind of my only shot to get money. My budget was so small. Giving Day was my only real way in. And then I came here, and it's a relatively small proportion of our overall budget here, but still worth an ask. And so I just want to highlight. So this is what the website for Giving Day at Creighton last year looked like. What is that? 17 buckets, right? 17 different things. But what you can't tell is that each of those buckets then has 18 things within it. So I think our ask was one of 13 asks that fell underneath student experience, right? So donors are inundated with options. They could pick any number of things. And we did not do that hard of a push last year. We put a couple things up on social media. We made some LinkedIn posts. We didn't go hard, and we managed to make $3,000 on it, right? It was a drop in the bucket compared to what the university made that day, right? But it's something, right? For us, we were trying to fund more travel grants. $3,000 gets us like 3.5 worth of student travel grants domestically at the rate that we hand them out, right? So that's 3.5 more students that get to go somewhere this year that wouldn't have necessarily gotten to. It's still worth doing. So I'm also happy to answer questions about ways to sort of pitch things in Giving Day and break down those smaller donations of like, your $20 will print a poster, that kind of stuff. Happy to help people think through that too.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at Christopher Newport. And here's my bake sale slide. I like that with the shower of coconut. But as Anne was talking, and Ashley also talking, for me, it's all about the stories. As Ashley mentioned, I mean, I wasn't trained to do fundraising. My PhD is in medieval literature and religion. What do we know about raising money? And so all of a sudden I get thrown into this. It's like, okay, you got to start talking to potential donors about raising funds. Well, how do you do that? Well, it really is, for me, it's all about the stories. So it's about sharing student stories. So I do this constantly with photos, talking about students who are going to conferences, talking about students who have published or co-authored publications, and working closely with our communications office to really make that happen. So I just sent them something this morning, actually, which I'll share with you in a minute here. Because they don't know unless I tell them. And that's the best way to get the word out there. Because then when the communications office publishes something, some kind of press release or pushes something on social media, potential donors are going to see that. So I send them pictures of students who are at conferences constantly. I've got a large group of students who are going, as I'm sure probably many of us do, to the Society for Neuroscience this week, who are presenting there. We'll have great pictures from that of students presenting at the conference, and donors like to see that, especially as I'll talk about in a minute, potential donors who are parents. Also making sure that we highlight students who are co-authors of publications. Brooke Nixon was the co-author of this publication with a psychology professor who's also the dean a couple of years ago. And so anytime a student publishes or co-authors a paper with a faculty member, we make sure that also is publicized. So it's going through our communications office, but it's also making use of our social media, obviously. I still do our Facebook page because I'm old. I have a student who does our Instagram page, thank God, because I still don't understand how it works. And then I put stuff up on LinkedIn, which also is helpful. But this is the newest example. These are two of our students. They're neuroscience majors, and they wrote a book this past summer on introducing neuroscience to kids. It's a kids book. Amber did all the illustrations, and they're amazing, including the ones on the cover. I think that's Billy Brain, if I remember correctly. And Caitlin did the text. And I pushed this to our communications office this morning to say, these students just published this book, this kids book. They're presenting on it actually at the Society for Neuroscience this week. And they also are going to then go into the local schools next semester to start working with kids. And they're going to do an IRB and do a pre-survey and a post-survey to see if kids are learning by actually reading and being told the book. I'll come back to your question in a second, Carrie. So we've all talked about external partners. I mean, I think some of us have different degrees of success with this. Industry is a tough one for us because we just don't have a lot of programs that would speak to industry, with the exception of our School for Engineering and Computer Science. We have very clear connections, close connections with NASA, who are right down the road from us here, and with the Jefferson Lab, which is right here in Newport News. So there are a lot of connections there. Now, most of those funding opportunities come through grants. It isn't direct donation, which is a little bit different. Government, of course, who the hell knows at this point, so don't even think about that right now. Nonprofits, we work with a lot of nonprofits, and those are more about collaborating than they are about raising money. Although it does get us in front of people who might be potential donors. And that, I think, is an important part of that. But there are challenges in working with external partners, right? As we all know. I mean, you need to build trust with them. You need to leverage experience. You're sharing resources. The risks that you're managing. We talk a lot these days about intellectual property and how that all works. I mean, you're working with an external partner and something is created as a result of a project. How does that work? There's also the added kind of bugaboo here, which I'll ask my co-facilitators to talk about in a minute, of public universities versus private, because I'm at a public, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But my biggest audience for asking for money has been alums and parents. I have worked hard to build an alumni base. We are still a relatively young university. We just celebrated our 65th year, and my office has only been open 8 years. I came here to open the office. This is the year 9 of our office. So we're just starting now to see alums who went through our programs coming out of grad school, starting to get established in their careers. And those are the people who I'm trying to make contact with and say, hey, remember the great experience you had when you were here as an undergrad? How about, giving back a little bit? We have a president's parent and family council. I imagine most institutions have something similar to this. These are current parents of current students, excuse me, who have already donated a sizable chunk in order to have the privilege of schmoozing with the president twice a year. Well, when they come to campus to do that biannual schmooze, I make sure that I get into one of those visits and present to them. So I've contacted the woman who runs that council, who works in our advancement office. I'm on her radar. And so usually when they come in the spring, I come and I give a presentation to them about what we're doing in our office. And from year to year, that audience changes. And that does garner some success and has garnered some success. And so I'm really high on doing that and talking to the parents and getting them involved. A lot of the times, to be sure, it ends up with a parent coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Wow, this is really great. How do I get my kid involved?" And I'm like, "Okay, that's wonderful, but how about you break out the checkbook because that's why I'm here." Um, so let me go back here to the questions first that are in the chat. Carrie asks about how we get information about student publications and presentations. Yes, it is largely student self-reporting. If they are co-authored publications, I really beg faculty to let me know. And they're usually pretty forthcoming about doing that because, they want to have their name in the spotlight too, and have the fact that they're working with students and publishing with them happen. It's come to the point now where we're well established on campus and the students kind of know we're here. And if they do something like that, we want to hear about it. Anne says at Embry-Riddle, they require a report to report out on all presentations, publications, mid and final reports. I do something similar with my travel. So students who travel to go to present at conferences, upon return, they have to submit a photo and a short reflection about what they got out of attending. I just set that up as a Google form to have them do it that way. And that's a really good place for me to go to find stories. Ashley asked whether the reports only for grants and initiatives are run through your office, or you're capturing that from the full faculty. Um, we are terrible about doing that. I don't know how other folks are. We are not good about doing that. We do have a separate office of sponsored programs that deals with grants exclusively. But as you can well imagine, these days, it is almost entirely focused on STEM, even though it is intended to serve the entire campus. So Anne answered there that currently it's primarily through the Office of Coordinated Funding, which I imagine is like my sponsored programs, the grants office. Um,
It's
Amy asked
actually
what
it's
types of,
actually through the URI office directly
oh, okay.
from our
So,
reporting.
Yeah.
But we are, for faculty to be able to be recognized for undergraduate research, the university is developing a mechanism that all of that reporting will have to route through one of our 3 campuses undergraduate research office. The
Yeah.
mechanism for that has not been finalized.
And then Amy asked about support for faculty mentors. Amy, I would refer you to a previous URP exchange where we did discuss that, about how we're all dealing with that. And those are all posted and archived on the URP website on the CUR page. So let me ask my facilitators here about the public-private issue. I mean, I'm at a public university. My hands are fairly tied about what I can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And we are largely, obviously, funded by the state. That's our biggest, donor, if you will. I mean, how do you deal with it, and how is it different at a private?
I mean, I'm at a private and we do have more flexibility. But there are still restrictions on what our philanthropy office can do. There has to be a direct benefit to the university. So in working with the community groups, which is something we've just begun to do, we have to walk that line very carefully so that there isn't pushback from the university. And we have to show direct benefits to our students. The industry partners we have are holistically related to our mission, so that's less of a problem. But I will say something that you brought up, and I think Ashley did too, on the restrictions on what funding can be used for. We've tried to work very carefully with philanthropy when we're coming up with the agreements for organizations to not box ourselves in.
Yeah.
So rather than say this project, like our first Honeywell project was an urban air mobility project, and rather than really defining that specific project, we defined the area more generally, so that when that project ended, we still had that funding that was open for that general area. And for our philanthropy councils, when they donate money, they are having a say in where it goes, but only in the generality of it's going towards this project, not, or it could be used for travel or for supplies, not exactly what it can be used for. And there's, our philanthropy office is really clear there cannot be a product expected, because as soon as there's a product or an expectation,
Yeah.
a specific product, it has to go to grants and contracts. And that's a
Right,
line
right.
we've
Yeah.
had to learn to walk really carefully.
Yeah.
Ashley, how about you?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think I've had a slightly different experience because our I have so many donors with very specific, right? I mean, like the amount of thought that we have to put into trying to match students who have applied for our summer programming with what pot of money can I fund them out of, really is a bit of a puzzle sometimes because certain folks have their money has been accepted by the university with contingencies on it that, are respecting those folks' desires and make it a little challenging for our office to execute. So, for example, we have a couple funded summer positions that haven't had students in them the last couple summers because there wasn't a student that met the exact, specifications of that particular donor. So I think, we've had a little bit of the opposite experience. I will say just both institutions that I've been in this position at have been private Jesuit Catholic institutions, but at very different scales and scopes. And so it was interesting to me. My other previous institution, I had a incredibly small budget for my office, right? But also I was not allowed to work with our advancement folks unless there was an ask of a certain dollar value, right? Like they didn't want to hear about I needed 10 grand. They wanted to hear about I need a 500,000, right? And that has not been the case here for me in my current position, as there's been a lot more question asking of what would be helpful, what do you need, what stories do you have to tell that might speak to someone. It's been much more of a conversation back and forth, which has made my comfort level getting into this space a lot greater because I can tell you stories about students all day long. I can tell you things about how this is impactful. Can I come up with a $500,000 pitch in 48 hours? Less my strength, right? Like I'll make one. Watch me come up with a way. I'll spend a $500,000 on undergrad research, but a little further out of my comfort zone.
I think that is a frustration. That's been a frustration for me. I mean, I'm at a medium-sized school. We have about 4,500 students. And when I go to the advancement office and say, we need to raise some money for undergraduate research, well, how much do you need? Oh, 100,000 would be nice. It's like they're looking at $1 million asks.
Yeah,
$100,000 is chump change for them, and they don't have the resources to spend working on that, which is really frustrating.
wild.
But Anne, go ahead.
I think that's one of the reasons that alumni are so important as a
Right.
piece of
Mm,
the pie. So alumni often have a passion, but maybe a single member of the alumni is not going to give a 500,000. And
yeah,
so you can do the smaller pieces with them.
yeah,
Um, I mean, if you have really staying in touch with your alumni and continuing to share the stories with them because they come back to then help later.
Yeah.
Um, we we have young alum who help with our undergraduate research program. No money, no ask for money. They're just helping with shaping it. But some of them have moved, I've been here 11 years, so now some of them have moved far enough along.
yeah,
And we have 5 at Blue Origin, right? And so
Wow.
they formed a team that helped then shape some of the funding coming in. Not a 500,000, right? A
Right.
small project, but an area they were really passionate about. And so that alumni connection has been
Yeah.
key.
and that
Well, and that's
alumni
exactly
piece.
why I've moved from working very closely with advancement to focusing more on alums and parents, because they've got the kind of money that I really can use, and it may be more possible that way. Ashley?
Yeah, I was just gonna say a lesson I learned at my previous institution was y'all are gonna get the sense for like why I left, but the folks in alumni relations were very guarded. They did not want us to have the ability to contact alums, and I'm sure some of you might be living in similar spaces, right, where it's you can't just say I would like it a list of all of the alumni from X, Y, or Z discipline or whatever, right? But what they failed to realize was that social media made it hard for them to keep us away from people, right? And so we would build LinkedIn groups and we would just start inviting, and it starts with the most recent alums, right? Because that's who you know and who you have connections with and who you can pull in. And then you could watch it trickle and grow, right? And see LinkedIn doing its LinkedIn thing, right? And that network starts getting bigger and bigger. Social media on, Instagram got us more connections with alums than we ever got through the alumni relations office there because they were so guarded with that information. And so I would encourage you to embrace the unconventional, ways
Yeah.
of connecting and telling these stories, because those were some of my better successes, honestly.
And one of the things that we started doing was because we were frustrated because we couldn't track them once they graduated, we would lose track of them. They weren't checking their university email anymore because they'd moved on to something else. So we've started putting out a survey to all of the students who've done research when they graduate, before they graduate, to give us their personal contact information, where
Mhm.
they're moving on to, so we can
Yep.
kind of continue to follow them and be in touch with them because
Mhm.
they stop checking their university email once they graduate, most of them. Carrie, you have a question?
More an addition to just continue what you're saying. So I'm at Virginia Tech, so we're a large public institution. We're not allowed to talk to donors at all, small or big. And what we did, Giving Day didn't work for us because there's so many other bigger things. And we get buried, really, really buried in the website. So we tried it and we made like $400, which for the effort was not worth it. But what somebody suggested to us, and we did try it, we did a standalone crowdfunding around the symposium. So we had like a QR code at the symposium, and I compiled a list of people who had applied for anything or done anything with us and sent emails. So recent alum mostly. And some of the names I did recognize, but we did get money. I mean, not huge. We got $2,000-3,000, but still for a first try was great. But I think based on some of that and tying into the storytelling, our advancement folks have recognized that we do have stories. And so we have a big weekend where I'll say our biggest donors come and they schmooze them. And we just coincidentally, our annual symposium is timed appropriately. So they're adding that to the offerings and saying, oh, go and spend your Friday here or part of your day. And so we're going to try and coordinate or orchestrate some opportunities for the donors to come in. And I mean, it's posters all day long. So they have good things to see and good students. But I think that's a good way to make them aware and get them excited because the stories are coming straight from the students as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't had success with Giving Day either. I mean, I'm jealous that Ashley was able to raise as much as she was, as little as it was, because
Yeah.
I mean, as you say, I mean, we're going up against, asks for the football team, and they're getting 25, $50,000, and my goal was to raise 5,000, and I'm getting 300. And as you say, it's just not worth the resources and the time for me to do that.
Yeah.
And were you going to say something?
I was just going to add to what Carrie said. We also were not successful with Giving Day at all, because I think they were tapping the same people we tap in other ways. But
Yeah.
our philanthropy office will work with specific student groups if they have a good story to do individual project crowdfunding too.
Mhm.
And that has been really successful because the students are directly speaking to those. And I think they've been some of our most successful crowdsourcing across the university.
Yeah. My previous institution did some clever things with Giving Day that I thought, that I've not yet seen here, and I don't, might be worth thinking about at your institutions, but they did lots of little challenges. So they would get a donor who was willing to say, I'll throw $1,000 at a challenge, make whatever challenge you want. And so then that challenge might look like which fund has the most current student donors. And so we would run around and tell students, like, we need $1. Like, we would run around with cash and say, like, I will give you $1 if you will go on and donate $1, right? So that we get 100 students that look like they donated and we get that $1,000 matching gift, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a hustle, but I'm not above a little bit of a hustle when I have, the world's tiniest budget, right? And so, like, finding those little funky challenges that advancement offices set up and picking the one that you think, I can get this one. They did one year there that it was like, how many people would log on during a lunchtime, like Shark Tank style pitch project, right? Bunch of us had noon classes. Guess how many kids were sitting on Zoom during noon classes in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience because we knew we could get butts in seats on Zoom and win the challenge for how many right? Like, sometimes you just gotta do the hustle, and that's the way to turn giving days into your advantage too, is those weird little matches and things.
That's great. Yeah. Do the hustle brings me back to my youth.
Yeah, I know.
But,
And I have to also share, David, we also literally did a bake sale one time, like, and that was possibly my saddest
as I
moment.
say, we're not beyond that.
Our teams do bake sales for their projects all the
Yep.
time.
Yeah.
Now they can't make their own food because of all the food restrictions.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to wind this up here. And thank you for participating in today's URP Exchange. Sincere thanks to my terrific colleagues, Anne at Embry-Riddle and Ashley at Creighton. Thanks to Kerr and especially to Todd Wagner for this tech support. We're going to take a break in December and look forward to being back in January when our exchange will look at best practices in undergraduate research websites with the 3 winners of last year's URP competition. The date, time, and registration information will be posted to the Kerr community. And I invite you all to have a wonderful day and happy holidays, and we will see you soon. Thanks very much.